I arrived in the village at dusk, the last coach wheezing to a halt as though it had dragged itself across the mountains reluctantly. The driver, a bent old man with eyes like cloudy ice, unloaded my trunk with a grunt and pointed at the narrow path that disappeared into the snow. His mouth moved as if to form a farewell, but what came out was only a short, breathy laugh. Then he turned the coach around and was gone, hooves muffled in the white silence. The cold here felt different. It wasn't just the sting against skin or the way the wind crept down into your bones. It was heavier, thicker, like the air itself was tired of moving. The snow lay in strange, untouched folds, perfect in shape yet marred by no footprints. I pulled my coat tighter and began the climb into the village proper. The place revealed itself slowly. First the roofs, steeply pitched against avalanches, their tiles glazed with frost that gleamed like scales under the failing light. Then the chimney smoke, gray strands curling upward into a sky that seemed bruised with purple. Finally, the narrow main street, a line of shuttered windows and crooked signs that all looked toward me as if my arrival was expected. The villagers were there too, though not in the way I anticipated. I had thought, foolishly, they might greet me with warmth, perhaps even a small crowd curious about the newcomer who had agreed to take the watchman's post. Instead, they appeared one by one, in doorways and alleys, their faces half lit by lanterns. A butcher in a leather apron, hands, red to the wrists. 2 children clinging to their mother's skirts, silent where children usually chattered. A woman sweeping snow off her stoop, though the flakes fell faster than her broom could clear. They watched me but said nothing. Only when I reached the square did someone speak. "You'll be wanting old Henrik." The voice belonged to a man, hunched by the well, a pipe clenched between yellowed teeth. His eyes never lifted to meet mine, fixed instead on the sky as if measuring the fading daylight. He jabbed the stem of the pipe toward a squat building near the chapel. I thanked him, though he gave no sign of hearing, and made my way to the indicated house. Inside, warmth struck me first, the thick, heavy heat of a wood stove that had been burning all day. The smell of pine resin and boiled cabbage hung in the air. A man sat at a rough table, his beard a spill of white against the dark of his coat. He looked up, and his eyes were startling. Pale, sharp, far younger than the rest of him. "So, you came." His voice had the rasp of stone on stone. "I did," I said, setting my trunk down. "They told me you're Henrik?" "Aye. Last watchman before you." The word last echoed oddly in my head. I didn't ask what had happened to the one before him. Henrik gestured for me to sit. On the table lay a leather-bound booklet, its cover scarred and softened with years of handling. It looked older than the village itself. "You'll be needing this." He slid the booklet toward me. I placed my hand on it, and the leather felt strangely warm, almost pulsing. "They're rules," Henrik said. "More important than food, fire, or breath. You keep them, and maybe you'll last the winter." He leaned back, pipe smoke curling around his face. "I'll teach you the routes, the lanterns, the hours, but the rules." His eyes narrowed. "The rules you'll carry in your marrow. Forget one, even once, and nothing here will save you." Outside, faintly, a bell tolled. It was so distant I thought at first it was the ringing in my ears from the cold. But Henrik stiffened, his eyes cutting toward the window. The bell tolled again, long, low, and hollow. "That," Henrik whispered, "is why we have the rules." For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then the sound faded into the mountains, swallowed by snow and dark. I looked down at the booklet again. Its cover bore no title, only a single etched symbol that might have been a circle or a mouth depending on how the light struck it. I felt the weight of it, heavier than its size should allow, as if the little book carried the village's entire burden within its pages. When I opened it, the ink looked handwritten, though the letters were precise, each one pressed with almost religious care. The first page bore only a sentence, underlined twice. "The bells are not to be trusted after dark." Henrik's eyes were still on the window, but his voice found me again, quieter now. "You're Watchman, lad. The night belongs to you. And the bells..." They belong to something else entirely. I swallowed, the sound loud in the overheated room. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying everything in silence. And just like that, I knew I had stepped into something that would not let me go easily. Henrik didn't speak again until he had stoked the stove, fed it a log, and drawn the curtains tight against the night. Only then did he settle back into his chair, pipe in hand, and nod at the booklet that still sat on the table between us. "Read it aloud," he said. His voice had softened from earlier, but the command in it was firm. The booklet was surprisingly heavy in my hands. Its pages crackled as if they had been dried in smoke, and the ink had a faded sheen like old blood. I hesitated only a moment before turning the first page. Rule 1. When the bells toll after dark, do not answer. Do not mimic them. Do not acknowledge them in any way. The bells are not to be trusted. I read the words, and Henrik closed his eyes, as though he were reciting along in silence. His lips moved faintly as if in prayer. Rule 2. Do not open your door after sundown, no matter who knocks. No voice, however familiar, is to be believed after dark. Wait until daylight returns. My throat went dry. Rule 3. The lanterns must be lit at dusk, each in its place. Should one go dark, relight it immediately. The light is your only shield against what the bells call forth. The room seemed to grow colder with each line. Rule 4. Walk the patrol path in full. Do not skip a turn, do not hurry through, and never stray beyond the lantern's glow. I glanced up at Henrik. His eyes were open now, sharp and unwavering on me. Keep reading, he said. Rule 5. The sheds at the edge of the square remain locked. Do not attempt to open them, and do not linger nearby when the bells toll. Their contents are not for you. The script was steady, but I could see places where the quill had cut deeper into the page, as if the hand that wrote it had trembled. Rule 6. Never climb the tower after midnight. The bells you hear there are not struck by human hands. The pipe smoke hung thick in the air, acrid and clinging. Rule 7. Do not speak the bells' rhythms aloud. To give them voice is to invite them closer. The weight of the booklet grew unbearable. I wanted to close it, but my fingers wouldn't obey. Rule 8. At dawn, write what you have seen and heard. Memory fades quickly in this place, and forgetting is the surest way to fall. The final line came like a whisper. Rule 9. If all else fails, endure until the next watchman comes. One must always remain, for the bells must always be answered by silence. When I finished, the room felt as though it had exhaled. The crackle of the stove returned. The boards beneath my chair creaked softly. But I noticed something else too. A hush. A waiting stillness, like the night outside had leaned. In close to listen, Henrik tapped the ashes from his pipe and finally spoke. You understand now why we keep to them? I nodded, though the truth was I didn't. Not fully. The words were simple enough, but they carried a weight I couldn't measure. They weren't advice. They weren't even warnings. They were laws written in bone. What happens if... I began, but Henrik cut me off with a glare. You won't break them, he said. Not if you want to leave this place with your skin still yours. The fire popped. The shadows along the ceiling shifted, stretching into crooked shapes. I swallowed. And if someone does? His silence was answer enough. The look in his eyes chilled me more than any words could. After a long pause, he leaned forward and poured 2 fingers of dark, bitter liquor into a chipped glass. He pushed it toward me. You'll need this, he said. It takes time for the bells to notice you. But once they do, they never stop. I drank, though the taste burned all the way down. Later, when he showed me the patrol routes by lamplight, he spoke in the same ritual cadence I had heard in the rules. Where to stop, where to turn, how to check the lanterns, which alleys to avoid when the bells were strong. He didn't tell me why, only that it must be done. The path traced the whole village like a protective circle. Every route led back to the square, to the chapel with its shuttered bell tower. The villagers had let the chapel rot, Henrik said, but the bells never rotted. They tolled when they pleased. As we walked, I noticed the way people retreated from us. A woman carrying water quickly crossed the street to avoid brushing past. A boy who had been playing with a hoop dropped it and ran into a doorway, his mother slamming it shut behind him. Their faces weren't cruel exactly, more like resigned. "You're not one of them anymore," Henrik muttered, catching my glance. "Not while you wear this post." We ended where we had begun, in the square, the lanterns already guttering in the cold. Henrik lit them one by one, his hands steady despite the wind. He nodded at me to do the last. My fingers shook as I struck the match. The lantern hissed to life, its glow thin against the dark. "Remember this," Henrik said. "Light is truth here. When it fails, the bells lie louder." The snow crunched somewhere beyond the houses, too far for sight but close enough to hear. The faintest echo of a bell drifted down from the mountains. Not a full toll, just the suggestion of one, like metal stirring in the distance. Henrik's jaw tightened. He blew smoke from his nose and muttered a phrase I didn't recognize. Then, louder, "You'll start your first watch tomorrow night." The bell faded, leaving silence deep enough to make my ears ring. I felt the rules inside me already, heavy and immovable, like a second skeleton. That night, I slept in the narrow cot Henrik had given me, the booklet clutched in my hands. The pages had imprinted themselves in my mind. I repeated them silently until exhaustion pulled me under. Even then, I dreamed of bells. They tolled not from towers, but from mouths. The next evening, Henrik pressed the iron key of the Watchman into my hand and gave me a look that was not encouragement but resignation. He didn't offer more words, and I didn't ask for them. The rules were clear enough, and the patrol path had been drilled into me until I could have walked it blindfolded. The sun bled away fast in the mountains. By the time I stepped into the square, the world was already blue and silver, the kind of twilight that feels like it never quite belongs to either day or night. The lanterns flickered along the perimeter, each one shivering in the wind, the flames fighting for breath. I adjusted my coat and began walking. Snow crunched underfoot, steady and rhythmic, the only proof I was moving at all. The air was so still that each breath sounded like a trespass. The smell of smoke drifted from a few chimneys, but no voices came from within. The whole village seemed to hold its breath as I passed. My first stop was the northern lantern, the one nearest the chapel. Its glass was frosted over, making the flame inside look like a star trapped in ice. I tapped the base with my glove, Henrik's little ritual, and then moved on. The patrol path wound between houses across the square, out past the edge of the woods and back again. At each lantern I paused, checked the flame, whispered the rule Henrik had taught me. Light is truth here. When it fails, the bells lie louder. At first it was easy. The rhythm kept me steady. Step, crunch, lantern, flame. The snow squeaked softly, my boots leaving a trail that looked too stark in the otherwise perfect whiteness. Halfway through the patrol, I stopped beside the eastern lantern and listened. That was when I heard it. Faint. So faint I thought it was. The wind at first. A low tone rolling through the mountains like thunder muffled by distance. A bell. It came again, clearer this time. Long, hollow, metallic. My heart kicked against my ribs. There was no church in that direction. Only the tree line, the slope, and the peaks beyond. Yet the sound carried with such weight, it felt as though the air itself shuddered with it. I remembered the rule: when the bells toll after dark, do not answer. Do not mimic them. Do not acknowledge them in any way. So I kept walking, but each step felt heavier. The sound crawled into me, vibrating in my teeth, my chest. My breath smoked the air in shaky clouds. I tightened my grip on the lantern's pole. Before moving on, the path skirted the edge of the woods. There the trees stood black and thin, their branches clawing at the sky. Snow clung to them in patches, making them look like skeletal figures draped in shrouds. Something shifted between them. At first I thought it was the wind, A branch moving, a trick of light. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw shapes. 3, maybe 4, swaying gently, almost in rhythm with the toll of the bells. They weren't wolves, and they weren't men. Their outlines were wrong, too elongated, too fluid. I forced myself not to stop, though my steps slowed. The lantern light fell just short of them, and I dared not step beyond the glow. The rules were clear. Never stray outside the lantern's reach. Another bell tolled, closer this time. The figures swayed harder, like puppets tugged by invisible strings. I turned my head away and fixed my eyes on the path. My throat burned with the effort, not to run. Snow crunched, lantern hissed, breath rasped. I repeated the rules in my mind like a prayer. When I reached the southern lantern, I nearly collapsed against it. The flame within fluttered, guttering low before regaining strength. I tapped the base, whispered the words, and tried to steady myself. The bells stopped. Just like that. Silence. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The silence was too deep, too heavy, pressing against my ears until I swore I could hear my own pulse. The shapes in the tree line no longer swayed. They stood utterly still, watching. I finished the patrol, every step a test of will. By the time I circled back to the square, my lungs ached and my legs trembled. The lanterns there looked brighter than before, welcoming in their fragile way. Henrik was waiting on the chapel steps, his pipe glowing in the dark. He didn't ask what I'd seen, and I didn't tell him. He only nodded once, a look of grim satisfaction passing over his face. "You walked it," he said. I nodded, unable to speak. "Good. Then you'll walk it again tomorrow, and the day after, until it's carved into your bones." The pipe ember flared as he drew on it. He blew the smoke toward the mountains as if mocking the bells themselves. "They'll test you," he said softly. "But you held your silence. That's the first battle won." The bells did not ring again that night, but their absence echoed louder than their sound. When I closed my eyes to sleep, I saw the figures swaying in the tree line, waiting for the next toll. By the fourth night of patrol, the routine had begun to settle into me like muscle memory. Step, crunch, lantern, flame. Step, crunch, lantern, flame. The booklet of rules was always in my coat pocket, though I no longer needed to read them. They burned at the back of my mind as though they'd been etched there. Henrik walked with me once more that evening, slower now, his breath coming hard in the cold. "You'll see soon enough," he muttered when I asked if the bells came every night. "They don't always toll for you. Sometimes they wait, sometimes they test." His words didn't ease me. If anything, they sharpened the tension that already knotted my shoulders. That was when we saw him, Jarek. He was a young man, broad-shouldered, ruddy-cheeked, the kind of villager who carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never left the valley but acted as though he owned it. A flask dangled from his gloved hand and his steps were uneven in the snow. He grinned when he saw us. "Look at you two," he slurred, "marching around with your lamps like old widows chasing shadows. You think the bells give a damn about your silly rules?" Henrik stiffened beside me. "Go home, Jarek. This isn't for you." But Jarek only laughed, the sound sharp in the night air. "All my life I've heard them. All my life the old fools mutter about rules and watchmen and lanterns. Nothing ever happens." He swayed closer, the stink of liquor on his breath. "Maybe it's time someone proved it." Before I could speak, the bells began. A single toll at first, far up the mountain, low and heavy. My stomach dropped. Henrik hissed, "Keep walking. Don't answer." But Jarek threw his head back and whistled, loud and mocking, echoing the bells. Pitch almost perfectly. The bell cut off mid-toll. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the air seemed to hold still. "See?" Jarek said, smirking. "Nothing. Just old iron ringing in the wind." I wanted to grab him to drag him back into the village, but my body wouldn't move. My feet felt rooted in the snow. Henrik's face was white as bone. "You damned fool," he whispered. The silence cracked. From the tree line came a sound like snow collapsing, but it was too precise, too deliberate. Jarek turned, still grinning, though the expression faltered when he saw the shadows move. The lantern at our side flickered violently, the flame nearly extinguishing. In that thin light, I saw something slide between the trees. Not walk, slide, as if it moved without touching the ground. Jarek stumbled back, his grin gone now. What is that? The shadows broke apart, then reformed around him. For a moment I thought he was surrounded by cloaks whipping in the wind. But then the cloaks swelled, and I saw the faint gleam of metal, shapes like bells warped and stretched, edges glistening wetly. Jarek screamed. It happened fast. One moment he was standing, arms raised as if to ward them off. The next, the snow beneath him darkened, blooming, red. His scream cut off so abruptly it left an echo. When the lantern steadied again, the shapes were gone. Only Jarek's flask lay in the snow, steaming faintly in the cold. A trail of blood smeared across the ground for several feet before vanishing into nothing, as though he had been dragged into the air. I couldn't move. My breath rasped loud, painful in my chest. Henrik finally seized my arm and yanked me forward. Don't stop. Don't look back. We walked, then stumbled, then half ran the rest of the patrol route, neither of us speaking until we reached the square. My hands shook so violently I could barely relight the last lantern. Henrik leaned against the chapel wall, his face ashen. He spat once, a thin line of blood on the snow, then muttered, "First rule broken, first taken." The bells never returned that night. The silence stretched until dawn, and the villagers carried on as though Jarek had never existed. No one mentioned his name in the morning. No one asked where he had gone, but I remembered. I remembered the way the bells had stopped, as if listening. I remembered the shapes that slid like shadows wearing skins of metal. And I remembered the blood, bright as a wound against the snow. From then on, I knew. The rules weren't suggestions. They were the only thin barrier between us and whatever answered the bells. And Jarek's laughter still rang in my ears, cut off mid-breath, a sound that ended too sharply to ever fade. After Jarek vanished, the village behaved as though he had never lived there. His name was not spoken, his absence unremarked. The butcher never paused to note the missing customer. The tavern had no empty stool, and the baker's daughter, Marta, looked through me when I nearly whispered his name. It unsettled me more than the disappearance itself. The human instinct to grieve had been stripped away, leaving a silence more damning than screams. Only Henrik acknowledged it, and even then with a hard glance and a muttered phrase. First rule broken. First taken, but the bells remembered. At first I only heard them at night during my patrols. The same low tolls from the mountain, carrying across snow and stone. But soon they followed me into the day. The first time, I was helping Henrik patch a lantern glass when a faint chime stirred the air. I froze, tools in hand, and looked up. The sun glared bright overhead. The village square was busy, children running, women carrying water, men stacking firewood. None of them reacted. "Did you?" I began, but Henrik cut me off with a sharp shake of his head. "No," he said firmly. "You didn't hear it." But I had. A bell so soft it might have been imagined, yet its vibration lingered in my teeth. Over the next week, the bells grew bolder. They chimed when I fetched water. They murmured when I tried to sleep. Sometimes a single note, sometimes a full toll, each one echoing inside me rather than outside, and no one else ever heard them. I began to wonder if Jarek's mocking whistle had opened something in me, marked me as a target. The booklet's warning burned at the back of my mind. The bells are not to be trusted after dark. But what about daylight? What about when they crept into your bones and refused to leave? One afternoon, Marta approached me while I checked the western lantern. Her cheeks were flushed from baking, her scarf dusted with flour. She gave me a small smile, hesitant, but real. The first kindness I'd received since taking the Watchman's key. "You walk alone every night," she said softly. "Does it frighten you?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to tell her everything. The shapes in the tree line, Jarek's scream, the bells that now haunted even the hours of sun. But her eyes carried something fragile, like she already knew more than she should. Sometimes, I admitted. Her smile faltered. She glanced toward the mountains, then leaned closer. I hear them too, she whispered. My heart stuttered. The bells? She nodded quickly, then pulled back as though afraid she'd said too much. In my dreams, only at night, they call my name. Her voice trembled. But when I ask my father, he tells me I'm imagining it. He says no one hears them but the Watchman. Before I could press her, she hurried away, scarf trailing behind. That night, the bells were louder than ever. Halfway through my patrol, they began as usual, low tolls rolling down the slopes. I kept walking, whispering the rules, under my breath. Then I heard something different, a second tone, higher, lighter, woven into the tolls. It wasn't random, it was patterned. It was my name. The sound stretched long and metallic, warped into something bell-like yet unmistakable. Each toll struck the syllables of my name, over and over, until my knees nearly gave out. Don't answer, I whispered to myself. Don't answer. But the bells pressed harder, vibrating in the air, in my chest, in my skull. The lantern light flickered, shadows lengthening like grasping hands. I stumbled forward, clutching the iron post like an anchor. A whisper slithered past my ear, not a bell, not quite, a voice. Jarek's voice. Help me. I spun, but the street was empty. Only snow and silence, another toll, another whisper. This time Henrik's voice, hoarse and broken. You'll fail. They'll take you next. I staggered forward, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. My boots left deep gouges in the snow as though the ground wanted to swallow me whole. When I reached the chapel square, the bells ceased. The silence was suffocating, but I almost welcomed it. My lungs heaved, my body shivering from more than the cold. Henrik was waiting at the base of the watchtower. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He didn't ask what I'd heard. He didn't need to. Instead, he muttered, "They're hungry tonight." The way he said it chilled me more than the bells themselves, because hunger is patient. Hunger always returns. And in that moment I understood. The Watchman wasn't there to protect the village. The Watchman was bait. The rules were clear. Lanterns must never go out. They were the boundary, the fragile wall between the village, and whatever pressed against it from the dark. For weeks I carried extra wicks, flints, and oil. Henrik drilled it into me, check them twice, check them thrice, don't trust memory, trust your eyes. And yet, one night, I failed. It was not from laziness, but from exhaustion. The bells had worn me down, gnawing at my sleep, coiling into my dreams. Even when they did not toll aloud, they whispered behind walls, under floorboards, inside my pulse. I stumbled through patrols half awake, skin raw from the cold, vision blurred from fatigue. That night, I missed one. The lantern at the edge of the eastern road, a lonely post where the snow drifted higher than my waist, where the path bent toward the tree line. I thought I'd checked it, thought I'd seen the faint flame through the glass. But hours later, when I circled back, the lantern was dark, and something had found it. The post was torn, wood splintered deep with claw marks. The lantern glass lay shattered across the snow, the shards catching faint moonlight. The air stank of iron and rot, a fetid breath carried on the wind. Then the bells began. Not distant this time, but circling, first to the north, one low toll, then to the south, another closer, then behind me, then ahead. The notes overlapped, weaving in unnatural rhythms, mocking, taunting, closing a net around me. I fumbled with my tinderbox, fingers stiff and clumsy. The wick slipped, the spark fizzled. My breath fogged in frantic bursts, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the striker into the snow. The bells grew louder, irregular, as if laughing. I snatched the striker, scraped again. Sparks flew, died. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, mingling with the tolls. I imagined shapes just beyond the tree line, vast and shifting, pressing closer with each chime. Finally, the flame caught. The wick flared, trembling in the cold. I shoved it into the lantern, hands blistering against the hot glass, oil searing my skin. Light spilled out, and the bells stopped. The silence was heavier than the sound, pressing against me like a weight. But in that silence I heard something else. Breathing. Not mine. It came from just beyond the circle of light, ragged and wet, as though lungs were clogged with water. Each exhale clouded the darkness with faint vapor, drifting in and out of sight. I stood frozen, clutching the lantern pole, knowing that if I stepped one pace farther from the light, I would not return. The breathing lingered a moment longer, then withdrew, dissolving into the snow. When I staggered back to the watchtower, Henrik was waiting. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. The soot on my gloves, the fresh burn on my palm, the look in my eyes told him everything. "You let one go out," he said, voice flat. "Yes." He nodded slowly, staring into the fire. Then, almost too low to hear, "They'll test you now. They know you're weak." I wanted to demand answers, to ask what they are, what they want, why the bells hunt us like hounds circling prey. But the words died in my throat. Because deep down I already knew. They wanted us to fail. And failure always had a price. That night, as I lay on my cot, the bells whispered just outside my window. They did not toll. They laughed. Marta was one of the only villagers who ever spoke to me like I was human. Most treated me as a shadow, a necessary nuisance, but Marta, she brought warmth, however small. A smile at dawn, a roll of bread slipped into my hand before patrol. A quiet word that reminded me I still existed. And she had confessed the truth few dared admit. She heard the bells too. After that night, she avoided me for a time, as though afraid of what she'd revealed. But eventually, she found me again by the square, her scarf pulled high against the wind. Her eyes darted nervously to the mountains. "They called me again," she whispered. "Last night. Louder." I wanted to tell her not to listen, to shut her ears, to hold on to the rules as if her life depended on them, because it did. But before I could, her father emerged from the bakery, flour streaking his apron. He fixed me with a cold stare and pulled her inside. She didn't look back. That was the last time I saw her in daylight. 3 nights later, the bells came for her. The patrol had been routine, snow thick but quiet. The lanterns burned steady, their glow steady as beating hearts. Then the tolls began, low at first, then climbing higher. Not random, never random. They were calling her name. Marta. Over and over, each syllable stretched through the air like molten metal. The sound clawed through my ears, vibrating in my bones until my knees buckled. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The bells weren't just outside, they were inside. I ran to the bakery. The windows were dark. No smoke curled from the chimney. The door was locked, but the snow outside was disturbed, footsteps leading toward the tree line. Small, quick, as though someone had run without a coat. I followed them. Each step deeper into the snow felt like a crime, a betrayal of the rules, but I couldn't stop. The prints were hers. I recognized the curve of her boot heel, the way she dragged her left foot just slightly. The bells tolled louder the farther I went, until the air shuddered like a struck drum. Shadows lengthened between the trees. The lantern light behind me seemed pitiful, a dying star swallowed by the dark. And then the tracks ended. In their place, a single scrap of cloth frozen into the ice. Marta's scarf. I dropped to my knees, tearing at the snow with bare hands until my skin split. My breath came in ragged gasps, fogging against the night. But there was nothing else. No body, no blood. Only the scarf, half buried like an offering. Bells rang once more, long, drawn-out, mournful. But beneath that mourning was something else. Triumph. I staggered back, clutching the scarf like a lifeline. The tolls echoed through me, filling me with a hollow dread I cannot describe. When I returned to the village, I shouted Marta's name. I told them she was gone, taken by the bells, and they looked at me with blank eyes. "Who?" her father asked, dusting flour from his hands. "I have no daughter." The others nodded in agreement, their faces eerily calm. No one remembered her. Not the way she laughed when snowflakes stuck in her hair. Not the bread she carried. Not the scarf she wrapped against the cold. They had erased her. I staggered back to the watchtower, scarf clutched tight, rage and grief boiling in me. Henrik found me there, muttering to myself, rocking as though I could shake the bells out of my skull. He sat across from me, eyes heavy. After a long silence, he said, "You're learning." "What do you mean?" My voice cracked. His jaw tightened. "The Watchman's job isn't to protect them. It's to remember. To carry the truth after the village forgets. That's why the rules exist. They keep the bells fed slow, piece by piece, one at a time." My stomach turned. "And Marta?" He didn't answer. I pressed the scarf to my face, the faint smell of flour and wood smoke clinging to the threads. My chest burned with grief, but beneath it was something worse. The realization that the bells weren't just winning. They were mocking me. Because what is more terrifying than being forgotten? The bells rang again that night, soft and slow, like laughter carried on the wind. After Marta vanished, the village pressed on as if nothing had happened. The bakery still smelled of bread, her father still stacked loaves in the window, and every passerby swore there had never been a girl named Marta. But I remembered. The scarf in my pocket told me I wasn't mad. I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, the bells tolled softly, like lullabies meant to guide me away. Their tones carried shapes, patterns, memories that weren't mine. They wanted me to follow. They wanted me to listen, so I went to the only place that might hold answers, the watchtower. The tower was older than the village itself, or so Henrik once claimed. Its stones were black with soot, its timbers swollen with centuries of frost. The stairs creaked like dying animals as I climbed, my lantern casting uneven shadows against the walls. At the top was a small chamber lined with shelves. Most were empty, but one corner sagged beneath the weight of rotting ledgers, journals, and scraps of parchment bound with twine. Dust coated everything, stirred by my breath in small ghostly clouds. I opened the first book. The ink was faded, the script uneven, but the words chilled me. The bells are patient. They call by name. They take what answers. The village forgets, but we remember. Always the Watchman remembers. I read on, my hands trembling. Page after page told the same story. Every generation had its Watchman. Each was handed the rules, sworn to uphold them. Each tried to resist, and each wrote in shaky script of the same fate. Villagers erased one by one, the bells growing louder, the Watchman bearing the burden of memory. One entry struck me hardest. Saw my wife vanish into the trees when the bells called her. In the morning, the bed was cold and the village swore I had never been married. Only the scarf remains. Only the bells remember. They want me to join them, but I delay. That is my duty. Delay until the next takes my place. Another spoke of mimicry. The bells learned my brother's voice. They knocked at my door in his laughter. I nearly opened it. I nearly believed. They adapt, they learn, they hunger. If I falter, all will be taken at once. I flipped through journal after journal, decades crumbling in my hands, the scent of mold and ash heavy in the air. All told the same story. The bells were not simply sound, they were entities, parasites. They lured and fed, shaping themselves to voices, to memories, to weaknesses. And the Watchman, always the Watchman, was the last tether, the last distraction. Sat there for hours, surrounded by the whispers of the dead, listening to the wood groan and the wind whistle through cracks. My lantern sputtered, and for a moment I thought I heard bells within the paper itself, soft tolls between the lines of ink. I forced the book shut, my pulse hammering. By the time I descended the tower, dawn had begun to gray the snow. The village stirred as though nothing had changed. The baker stacked loaves, the children ran laughing, the smith hammered steel. And yet I carried their ghosts in my arms. I carried the knowledge that none of this was survival. It was postponement. The rules were never a shield. They were a leash. Every mistake fed the bells. Every watchman delayed the inevitable. And I was next in line. That night, when the bells tolled, I swore I could hear Marta's laughter beneath the sound. The rules said it plain. Never open the door if you hear them closer than they should be. I repeated that line to myself every night like a prayer. But prayers crumble under grief, and the bells knew it. The blizzard came sudden, swallowing the mountains in white. Snow battered the watchtower, rattling the shutters, howling through cracks in the stone. The lantern flames outside bent sideways in the gale, their light struggling against the storm. I huddled by the fire, Marta's scarf clenched in my fist. That was when the knocking began. At first I thought it was the wind, a shutter banging loose, or ice breaking from the eaves. But then I heard her voice. "Please, let me in." "Marta." My chest seized. Her voice was faint, muffled by the door, but it was hers, the exact lilt, the warmth, the tremor she'd had that last day. I pressed my palms to my ears. No, it isn't her. The knocking grew frantic. Wood shuddered beneath each blow. "It's so cold out here, please, I'm freezing." I stumbled to the booklet, flipping through pages with shaking hands. "Do not open the door, do not open the door, but guilt is a cruel weight." Guilt whispered that maybe she hadn't been erased. Maybe she'd escaped. Maybe she was out there now, dying in the snow while I cowered inside. The bells tolled once, deep and slow, vibrating through the floor. Her voice cracked into sobs. "I can't feel my hands. Please, I don't want to die." I broke. I unlatched the bar and pulled the door open. Snow blasted in, stinging my skin. For a moment all I saw was white. Then a shape lurched through. Tall, thin, bending in ways no body should bend. It was not Marta. Its head was stretched long, the skull distorted, into a bell shape, hollow and ringing faintly with each movement. Its arms dangled to the floor, fingers scraping the wood, joints bending backward as it crawled inside. The sound it made wasn't breathing, it was tolling, low and wet, each exhale vibrating in my chest. Marta still clung to its lips, but warped, echoing, like a voice heard underwater. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the hearth. My mind screamed to recite the rules, but my throat was frozen. The thing crawled closer, joints snapping, the tolling louder now, inside my skull. Its fingers brushed the scarf in my hand, claws rasping against the fabric. Finally, the words tore. Free. Rule 1. Never answer the bells after dark. Rule 2. Never open the door if you hear them closer than they should be. Rule 3. The creature reeled, head striking the rafters with a booming clang that rattled my bones. Its voice warped into shrieks, dozens of tones overlapping. It clawed at the air as though the words burned it. I screamed the rules again, louder this time, forcing each syllable into the storm. My voice broke, but the words carried power. The thing convulsed, its body folding in on itself, limbs twisting until they snapped. The tolling grew desperate, frantic, then suddenly cut short as dawnlight spilled across the horizon. In the pale glow, the creature dissolved, snow and ash scattering into nothing. I collapsed to my knees, throat raw, lungs burning. The scarf lay torn in half, threads singed at the edges. I clutched it to my chest, sobbing into the frayed cloth. When Henrik found me hours later, I was still on the floor, muttering the rules through cracked lips. He said nothing, only shut the door and lit the fire. But his silence told me what I already knew. Another rule had been broken and the bells would never forget. I thought surviving the door meant victory, that if I held fast to the rules afterward, I could keep the horror at bay. But the bells had learned something new that night. They had learned me. It began with whispers in the dark, faint as breath against the glass. My name, carried on the wind. At first I dismissed it as exhaustion. Then I heard it again, clearer, this time stretched into tolls. Name. The syllables rolled through the air like molten iron. Soon it wasn't just my name. The bells began speaking secrets. They whispered things no one should know, words my mother said to me as a child, the prayer I once stammered at my father's grave, the nickname Marta had once teased me with when flour dusted my coat. Each toll bent those memories into sound, warped but recognizable. They weren't just calling me, they were inside me. The village noticed the change, not with words, but with glances. The butcher no longer met my eyes. The blacksmith muttered curses. When I passed, mothers pulled children close as though my shadow alone carried contagion. Henrik avoided me too. He no longer checked the lanterns with me, no longer offered muttered advice. When I caught him watching, it was with something close to pity. The isolation cut deeper than the cold. One night while lighting the western lantern, I heard my own voice behind me. "Careful, you missed a spot." I froze, flame trembling in my hand. Slowly I turned. A figure stood just beyond the light, swaying gently. It was me. Same coat, same boots, same lantern dangling from one hand. But its eyes glowed faintly, and when it smiled, its teeth shone. Like wet glass, it lifted the lantern in mockery and whispered in my exact tone, "We're the same now." The bells tolled immediately after, so loud they cracked the lantern glass. I staggered back, clutching the iron post. When I looked again, the figure was gone. Only the echo of my name lingered, stretched into the night. I wanted to tell the villagers, to warn them, but when I tried, they turned away. One woman hissed, "This curse follows you, Watchman. It's your fault the bells are loud again." Her words struck harder than any claw. I stumbled through patrols after that, my name ringing, in every corner. The tolls no longer sounded distant. They echoed within the village walls, from rafters, from chimneys, from the frozen well. Sometimes when I lay in bed, I swore they rang inside my chest, each heartbeat a bell strike, hollow and resonant. The rules had not failed me. I had failed them. And in doing so, I had given the bells my name. Now they could call me whenever they wished, and sooner or later, I would have no strength left to resist. Snow fell soft as feathers the morning the new Watchman arrived. The village looked the same as it always had. Smoke curling from chimneys, bread in the bakery window, laughter faint in the streets. Normal, ordinary, a lie wearing the face of peace. He was young, broad-shouldered, carrying a satchel, and the eagerness of someone who thought a mountain post meant solitude and simple work. The villagers greeted him with the same hollow smiles they had once given me. They didn't warn him. They never did. Henrik was gone by then. I don't know if the bells took him, or if he walked into them willingly, but his absence left only silence. And so it was the eldest butcher who handed the boy the weathered booklet. The rules. Always the rules. The boy accepted them with a polite nod, not seeing how the butcher's hands shook, not seeing the villagers glance nervously at the mountains, as if afraid the bells might overhear. I watched all of this from higher up, from the ridges above the village, where the wind cut sharp and the snow buried itself in stone. My body no longer ached, no longer shivered. I was something else now. The bells rang softly within me. At first I thought becoming part of them meant obliteration, dissolution into endless sound. But it wasn't erasure, it was joining. I could still think, still remember. I was memory, bound in iron and echo, and I was not alone. When the wind died, I heard voices in the tolls, Jarek's mocking laughter, Marta's quiet sobs, Henrik's weary muttering, hundreds more, overlapping, weaving into chords of grief and hunger. Each, one a name once carried, a life once lived, now tolling forever in the dark. Together we waited. The boys' patrol began that night. I felt it before I saw him. his steps crunching in the snow, lantern light flickering in the storm. He paused often, eyes darting toward the tree line, sensing what he could not name. I remembered that feeling. The unease, the cold that never left the bones, the silence that pressed harder than sound. The bells wanted him. They always want the new one. But they were patient. Patient enough to let him believe he had a chance. I told faintly now, softer than the others. A whisper of a note carried down the slopes. Not enough to frighten him. Not yet. Just enough for him to feel something strange stir in his chest. Soon he will learn the rules are not protection. They are delay. And when he breaks them, as he must, he will join us, ringing forever in the mountain air. The snow drifts, the lanterns flicker. The cycle continues. And somewhere in the wind, if he listens closely, he will hear my voice inside the bells, calling his name.